Hey there, folks. Before we dive in, I just want to say, if you want to keep up with stories like this one, make sure to follow S News. You can support us by subscribing, liking and dropping a comment. It really helps us keep going, so, thanks for being here. The Israeli military faces its worst rebellion in 75 years. The Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, are facing the biggest crisis of internal rebellion since the founding of the state 75 years ago. And we're not just talking about a few upset soldiers here and there. This is a full-blown collapse in military discipline that has Netanyahu and his war cabinet in complete panic. Here. Let's start with what sparked this, the event that opened the floodgates. 4 soldiers from the Nahal Brigade, Battalion 931. This isn't just any unit. The Nahal Brigade is one of Israel's elite infantry forces. It was founded in 1948 and has taken part in every major conflict Israel's fought. These aren't pacifists or peace activists, they're battle-hardened warriors. These 4 had fought in multiple combat tours in Gaza. They've watched their friends die. They've seen things that would break most people. When they were ordered to go back for another tour, they looked their commanders in the eye and said, "We're done." They claimed to be suffering from a deep internal crisis caused by the trauma of losing so many comrades and everything they had experienced in battle. What's interesting is how the army responded. At first it acted quickly and harshly. These soldiers were sentenced to military jail for between 7 and 12 days. That's standard procedure in any army. Refuse an order, face consequences. But then something totally unexpected happened. The Israeli public, the same public that usually supports the army without question, erupted in anger. Families of the soldiers, veterans organizations, and even some right-wing politicians started asking uncomfortable questions. One soldier's mother went on Israeli TV and asked, "Why are we punishing these kids instead of giving them mental health care? What kind of army treats traumatized soldiers like criminals?" The backlash was so loud, so fast and so widespread that the IDF was forced to do something it almost never does. It backed down. The jail sentences were suddenly cancelled. Can you imagine the United States military cancelling court-martial punishments because of public pressure? That just doesn't happen. But it happened in Israel. That alone shows how serious this crisis really is. But it's not just about those 4 soldiers. Meet Yuval Green, a 26-year-old reservist doctor and former paratrooper who's become the face of this rebellion. Green isn't some anti-war activist. He's a proud soldier who served his country. But his story, which he shared with ABC News, CNN and multiple Israeli outlets, is, well, chilling. Green was deployed in southern Gaza with his reserve unit. Everything started out normally. Routine military operations, following orders, doing his job. Then came the moment that changed everything. His commanders ordered his unit to burn down a Palestinian house, not a house used by Hamas, not a weapons storage site, just a regular home where a Palestinian family had lived. Green went to his commander and asked the question that would end his military career. Why are we doing this? What's the military purpose? The answer was terrifying in its simplicity. Because we can. That's when Green realized this wasn't a war anymore. It was revenge. In his own words, he described how Israeli soldiers were using Palestinian homes for military purposes, but were also taking souvenirs, vandalizing property, and destroying things simply because they belonged to Palestinians. He said he personally witnessed 2 separate cases where homes were burned, one by a soldier acting on his own and the other by direct order. He saw fellow soldiers looting civilian homes, not for intelligence or strategic reasons, but as spoils of war. He described systematic destruction of civilian infrastructure that had 0 military value. But Green didn't stop there. He talked about a total breakdown in discipline. Commanders were doing whatever they wanted, creating what he called a Wild West, where some officers could commit war crimes without facing any real consequences. The psychological toll on Green was massive, he told CNN. "I realized we don't value Palestinian lives enough. I can't be part of this anymore." When his unit was ordered back to Gaza, he made the hardest decision of his life. He refused to go. You might think Green is just one isolated case. He's not. He's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's look at the numbers. These come directly from Israeli defense sources and military analysts. At the start of the war, after the Hamas attack on October 7th, reservist turnout hit historic highs. In some units it hit 150%. People were showing up even without being officially called up. But now, according to the Times of Israel and other defense sources, turnout in units fighting in Gaza and Lebanon has dropped to between 75 and 85%. Some reports say it's gone as low as 60%. Here's why that's a big deal. Israel's reserve system is built on the assumption of near total participation. The whole military doctrine relies on the ability to rapidly mobilize hundreds of thousands of reservists at any time. When that rate drops to 60%, it's not just a military issue, it's a threat to national security. But the raw numbers don't tell the full story. Let's talk about who's refusing to serve. These aren't draft dodgers or college kids trying to avoid military service. We're talking about veterans, elite unit leaders, and experienced officers. Take the case of 41 Israeli intelligence officers who signed a public letter calling the war unnecessary, accusing Netanyahu of prolonging it to save his political career. These aren't peace activists. These are people with top-secret clearance, people who know the real strategic situation better than almost anyone else. Or consider retired Air Force officers like Major Haggai Tamir and Lieutenant Colonel David O'Reilly. During a protest in Tel Aviv, they addressed active pilots directly, telling them, "Stop flying these missions. You're committing war crimes. Open your eyes." When former military officers publicly call current operations war crimes, something has gone very wrong. Even Israeli intelligence agencies are seeing pushback. Multiple reports say dozens of analysts and field agents have asked to be removed from Gaza-related operations. They say the work is causing moral injury, the psychological damage from doing things that go against their basic beliefs. Even worse are the reports from soldiers still in service. According to a shocking investigation by Haaretz, IDF officers and soldiers told journalists they were ordered to shoot at unarmed Palestinian civilians near food distribution sites in Gaza, even when there was no threat. Let me repeat that. Israeli soldiers say they were ordered to fire on unarmed Palestinians just trying to get food. No weapons, no threat, just hungry people trying to feed their families. These orders are blatantly illegal, and they've triggered a formal war crimes investigation by the Israeli Military Prosecutor's Office. The soldiers who came forward described these areas as killing fields, places where civilians were systematically targeted without any military justification. One soldier told Haaretz anonymously, "I realized what we were doing had nothing to do with military goals. It was just killing for the sake of killing. I couldn't be part of that anymore." The Washington Post conducted its own investigation, verifying over 120 photos and videos from Gaza. They showed Israeli soldiers celebrating destruction, mocking Palestinian civilians, calling for Israel to reoccupy Gaza and documenting what can only be described as potential war crimes. The fact that soldiers are filming themselves doing this shows just how normalized this behavior has become. But maybe the saddest part of this crisis is what's happening to the soldiers themselves. In 2023, the IDF reported 17 soldier suicides, 7 of them after October 7th. But military psychologists say the real number is probably much higher, since many cases are classified as accidents or training deaths to avoid stigma. The mental toll is unprecedented. Dr. Rachel Yehuda, a trauma expert who has worked with Israeli veterans, told reporters she's seeing levels of PTSD, moral injury, and psychological collapse worse than in any previous Israeli conflict. These soldiers are being asked to do things that go against everything they've been taught about military ethics, she said. There's only so much the human mind can take. This crisis has reached the very top of Israel's military leadership. Israeli media reports say IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi has had intense clashes with government ministers, demanding clear strategic goals for the Gaza operation. In one meeting, sources say he literally shouted at Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, "Give me a plan." What are we even trying to achieve here? The gap between military and political leadership has grown so wide that the IDF has been operating for months with no clear strategic direction. Commanders are making tactical decisions in a strategic vacuum, which helps explain why so many operations feel aimless or, even counterproductive. Netanyahu's response has been defensive and, honestly, increasingly desperate. He dismissed reports of soldier misconduct as blood libels, a term with deep historical meaning in Jewish culture. Netanyahu used a loaded term from Jewish history, blood libels, to dismiss reports of misconduct by Israeli soldiers, implying they were false accusations meant to smear Israel. But here's the issue with that narrative. These reports aren't coming from Israel's enemies. They're coming from Israeli soldiers, Israeli journalists, Israeli human rights organizations, and even Israeli military prosecutors. When a newspaper like Haaretz, which has supported Israel through every past conflict, publishes detailed investigations into potential IDF war crimes, you can't just brush it off as anti-Israel propaganda. The global consequences of this military rebellion are huge. Israel's entire strategic doctrine is built on two things: military superiority and internal unity. The idea that Israeli soldiers might refuse orders, question missions, or even turn against government operations goes straight to the heart of Israel's deterrence power. Regional powers are watching this very closely. Iran, Hezbollah, and others are likely calculating how this internal conflict might affect Israel's ability to respond to future threats. If Israel can't rely on its soldiers to follow orders, how can it maintain a credible deterrent? The economic fallout is just as serious. Israel's economy heavily depends on its reserve system, where hundreds of thousands of citizens rotate between civilian jobs and military service. When reservists stop showing up, it doesn't just affect military readiness, it disrupts the entire economic structure. Israeli tech companies, many of which employ reservists, are already reporting major disruptions. Employees are struggling with the psychological effects of their service, and some companies have had to launch special mental health programs for staff returning from Gaza. But the political consequences might be the most dangerous of all. Netanyahu's coalition government has stayed together largely by promising military victory in Gaza. If the army can't or won't keep fighting, if soldiers are refusing orders, and if the war effort collapses from within, then Netanyahu's political future is in serious danger. Opposition leader Yair Lapid has already started calling for immediate elections, arguing that Netanyahu has lost the army's trust and can no longer govern effectively. Even some members of Netanyahu's own coalition are privately expressing doubts about the sustainability of the current strategy. But maybe the deepest impact is moral. Israel was founded as a refuge for the Jewish people after the Holocaust, built on the idea of never again. The IDF has long prided itself on holding to ethical standards, even under extreme conditions. Its official doctrine includes the concept of purity of arms, which means soldiers are expected to minimize harm to civilians, even if it puts them at risk. When Israeli soldiers start saying their army is violating those very principles, when they refuse orders because they believe they're being asked to commit war crimes, that's not just a scandal. It's a moral crisis that strikes at the heart of what Israel claims to stand for. The soldiers refusing to serve aren't betraying Israel, they're trying to save it. They're trying to preserve the moral integrity of a country they love, an army they've served proudly, and values they believe are more important than any tactical advantage. Yuval Green put it best when he told CNN, "I love my country. That's exactly why I can't keep serving in this war. Because what we're doing in Gaza isn't protecting Israel. It's So what happens next? That's the most important question, and no one in Israel's leadership seems to have an answer. Military analysts warn that if these trends continue, if more units start refusing orders, if reservist turnout keeps dropping, Israel could find itself in an unprecedented situation where it's forced to end the war, not because of a military defeat, but because its own soldiers simply won't fight. The international community is watching this unfold with a mix of shock and fascination. Some see it as proof that Israeli society still has a moral conscience. Others see it as a sign of weakness that could invite aggression from Israel's enemies. One thing is clear: This isn't just a military crisis, it's an existential crisis for Israeli society. The questions these dissenting soldiers are raising go to the core of what kind of country Israel wants to be, what it's willing to do in the name of security, and how much it's willing to sacrifice for military goals that seem increasingly unclear. The world is watching. History is being written in real time, and the decisions Israeli soldiers, leaders and society make in the coming weeks and months won't just determine the outcome of this war, they'll shape the future of Israel itself.